see how you can set up the CloudLinux PHP Selector from scratch on a newly converted CloudLinux OS on cPanel. If it is a fresh installation, Live Manager suggests the user to use Wizard to install CloudLinux components required for work. Let's look at the My User 1 user. He can see the PHP Selector link in his interface. Let's click it. It is loading, but for now, the user cannot use the CloudLinux PHP Selector. And he can see the following warning: cannot manage PHP versions when cagefs is disabled. Let's set up the CloudLinux PHP Selector step by step. Go back to the Wizard page. First, let's start installation in the Wizard. You must install cagefs to use the CloudLinux PHP Selector and enable the Enabled by Default for New Customers account option and the Enable for Existing User accounts. Next, you should configure PHP. Set up some PHP versions you are going to use. Say these versions. And set Enable Selector. It is required. Then click the Finish and Install button. So the installation begins. Loading. While the Wizard is installing the components, let's go to the PHP info page and check an actual PHP version for the myuser1.com domain. The version is 7.2. And you can see that a package is EA-PHP, i.e. provided by cPanel. Let's see where you can check a PHP version. Go to the Administrator interface, to the cPanel Multi-PHP Manager. Multi-PHP Manager and PHP Selector operate very closely. Note which version is used by the domain. Loading. The two key things are important for the CloudLinux PHP Selector. The first one is the system PHP version. The second one is the domain PHP version. The myuser1.com domain has an inherit PHP version, which means that the PHP versions are inherited from the system PHP version. So the domain PHP version should be the same as the system PHP version. Let's go to the PHP info page and check. Yes, the PHP version is 7.2. Let's go back to the Administrator interface. For the CloudLinux PHP Selector work, it is required that the system PHP version and the domain PHP version are the same. They should match at the multi-PHP Manager level, i.e. PHP version for the myuser1.com in the interface should be either inherit or the system PHP version. And then the CloudLinux PHP Selector will work. Let's go back to the Live Manager and see the installation progress. Loading. You can see the installation is in progress, and you should wait until the required components will be installed completely. Installation. You can click and expand the pop-up with installation progress. Installation. You can see that cagefs was installed. Installation. So, cagefs and PHP Selector are installed successfully. Let's go to the Selector tab under the Administrator and check the CloudLinux PHP Selector. Loading. You can see the warning that PHP Handler does not support the CloudLinux PHP Selector. And the CloudLinux PHP Selector cannot work if the mod ruid2 module for Apache is installed. Let's solve these issues. First, let's figure out how you can remove the mod ruid2 and install the mod suexec module. To do so, let's go to the Easy Apache 4 management page. Loading. This is a cPanel interface that allows a user to manage modules for Apache. Loading. Let's move to the Currently Installed Packages section. Click Customize. Loading. Go to the Apache Modules section, and you can see that the mod Ruid 2 is installed, but you need the mod su exec. And you can see that the mod su exec is not installed. Click Install, and the mod su exec installation will automatically cause the mod Ruid 2 removal. Click Yes and Next to select versions. Here we do not need to select versions. We will use those already installed. Let's go to the Review section and start the package installation. The package is preparing for installation. Let's scroll down and click Provision, waiting for packages to be updated. Packages are updating. Provision process finished. Click Done. So the mod su exec was installed and the mod Ruid 2 was removed. Let's go back to the Live Manager interface and see if there are still any issues. Loading. Go to the Selector tab. Loading. So, the diagnostic tool is completing the check. Loading. And you can see that the issues have been resolved. Please also check that in the Multi-PHP Manager interface, the handler and system versions are compatible. So, the system PHP version is 7.2, and the handler for it should be compatible with the CloudLinux PHP Selector. We can see the EA PHP 7.2 in the list, and the handler is CGI. Let's see which handlers are compatible with the CloudLinux PHP Selector. Let's check that in the CloudLinux documentation in the compatibility matrix. You can see that for the compatible handlers there is Yes, and for the incompatible ones there is No. Also, you can see that the mod Ruid 2 is not compatible. The PHP FPM is not compatible either. CGI, FCGID, SUPHP, Lightspeed are compatible. Let's go back and check that the handler for the system version is compatible. We don't recommend to select None as the CloudLinux PHP Selector will not work. So we have CGI and it's okay. A small detail: after removing the mod Ruid 2 and installing the mod su exec module, you should update the cagefs skeleton. You can do it via SSH with the cagefsctl force update command. The command is running. It is necessary because cagefs was installed earlier than the mod su exec. Thus, you should update the cagefs skeleton. You can also do it in the CloudLinux Live Manager interface. Let's go to the Live Manager. Loading. Go to the Options tab, the cagefs section. Loading. And here you can see that the cagefs skeleton is updating. And the Update cagefs skeleton button is here as well. Updating. So, cagefs is now updated. Let's go to the Users tab and see the user's cagefs. Loading. And cagefs for the user is enabled, so he can use the CloudLinux PHP Selector. Let's go back to the user interface and see. Refreshing. So, you can see that the user domain is now managed by the CloudLinux PHP Selector, and the user can use any pre-installed alt PHP version. Let's select PHP 7.2 and see what will happen. Let's go to the PHP info page. Refresh it. So, the PHP version changed. And now the user uses alt PHP 7.2. Before, it was EA PHP 7.2. So, the CloudLinux PHP Selector works. Thanks for watching. See you next time.